Sophie Harper was utterly unprepared when she saw that glaring red lipstick stain on Nathaniel Monroe's collar, a mark of betrayal that sliced through what once seemed like a flawless marriage. Standing on the sun-drenched balcony of their Newport Hills mansion, she realized that 10 years of love had never been enough to shield her from coldness and deceit. She took a deep breath, silently vowing she would not stay silent this time. Sunlight refracted through the crystal clusters above, casting flickers of light like an omen for the inevitable clash between love and truth. Sophie Harper stepped out from the upstairs bedroom of the Newport Hills estate, where the marble facade gleamed under the waning Sunday. She was still in her pale silver silk dress, each fold gently hugging her figure, the fading sunlight tracing her curves with a quiet reverence. She looked delicate, but her eyes held a depth that spoke of tears damned too long. Today, everything shifted. Silence had grown heavier than any words. An antique armchair sat by the window, where she used to read and daydream about a glittering future with her successful entrepreneur husband. The silence between them stretched into every breath, a cold, invisible gulf. Nathaniel Monroe stood in front of the tall bedroom mirror, adjusting his deep charcoal Ferragamo tie. The reflection cast light over his navy silk Italian suit. He looked down at the blood-red lipstick on his white collar, not Sophie's muted rose, but a bold, unmistakable scarlet, Leah Moretti's signature shade, the new executive from Milan who joined Monroe Industries just 3 months ago. Sophie had recognized that scent from a distance, velvet orchid, the luxurious perfume that announced its presence before its wearer entered the room. Nate didn't turn when Sophie entered. He didn't say hello, only muttered absently, "Don't wait up tonight. Some of us actually have to work." The words fell like a cold dagger into the room. Sophie didn't just hear them, she felt them. Not because she loved him anymore, but because she knew what it meant to be the wife left behind. "I'll be attending the Monroe Industries gala," she said crisply. "Or should I apologize on your behalf again?" Her tone was sugar-laced steel. They were just a few steps apart but felt worlds away while he focused on his tie. She stood waiting for a reaction that never came. "Last time I had to skip because it was inconvenient," Nate said, still facing the foggy glass. "Don't embarrass me this time." The chill in his voice felt like ice water down her spine. Sophie swallowed the pain like a soldier nursing a quiet vendetta beneath a polished exterior. The Newport Hills mansion nestled behind the San Rafael Hills near Malibu, where sea winds filtered through every room, but none strong enough to clear the emptiness that had settled within. It used to be where love lived in every sunrise and tender glance, where they'd gaze at the ocean from the balcony and dream of forever. It felt like a horror movie set gilded on the outside, frozen at the core. She reached to straighten Nate's tie, but he stepped back slightly. "I don't want anything dirty on me," he said, not cruelly. Just enough for her to understand that his heart had departed. Once, her tenderness had saved him. Now, it barely scratched the cold armor he wore. She could have cried, but no tears fell. Strangely, what lingered was not sorrow but the ghost of a love that had long extinguished. Back in the bedroom, Sophie knelt beside an old ebony jewelry box. Inside, she found a tiny USB drive. She remembered the night just 4 months ago when she and Nate had renewed their vows. In a candlelit rose garden, he had whispered, "Even if everything breaks, you're still my present," and she had believed him. The USB held undeniable proof. Photos of Nate and Leah holding hands entering the Beverly Hills Hotel, intimate texts, and luxury receipts. She had a PhD, had defended her thesis at Yale yet now. This evidence reduced her to a woman discarded. Her quiet rebellion turned volcanic when she unearthed a hidden clause in their prenuptial agreement. If Nate were unfaithful, Sophie would receive everything, not just half. Surrounded by luxury and the unraveling of a once powerful family, Sophie stood by the balcony, her fingers tightening around the railing. The ocean breeze stirred the drapes, but she only felt the sharpness in her lungs stronger, colder than ever before. For the first time, she didn't feel broken. She felt powerful. The night would be long. But Sophie Harper knew one thing for sure. She was no longer the betrayed. From now on, she would be the strategist. And in the icy stillness of Newport Hills, a war was quietly taking form. She sat motionless before her laptop screen, folders of photos and chat logs slicing through her like 1,000 tiny blades. Nate had once called her the light among West Coast titans. Now, what did he call her? A nuisance, a placeholder, an accessory at shareholder dinners. For 3 months, they hadn't shared a bed. No explanation, no touch, no look that held any soul. She remembered the last time he touched her at Monroe Industries' $50 billion valuation celebration. He had kissed her forehead for the cameras, sweet, warm, and strangely hollow. She thought she was paranoid. Until that day, the day of the lipstick stain and the lingering scent of velvet orchid. She had once believed love was something you could build with logic, that discipline and loyalty could hold a marriage together. But Nate didn't play love with logic. He played it like a game of strategy, and she was no longer his chosen partner. She texted Naomi, her best friend from college, just 3 words. Breakfast. Tomorrow. Urgent. Naomi replied within a minute. Carlton at 10. Bring fire. That night, the Newport Hills estate was so silent that even a pin drop would echo. Sophie stood alone in the grand living room, beneath a 6-meter ceiling and dim crystal chandeliers that seemed weary from witnessing too many lies. The wedding photo they'd hung since their big day, an oversized image of Sophie and Nate embracing in the Carmel Bay, now looked like strangers' vows caught on camera. He had removed every photo of her from his office. He replaced them with images of himself on the board. But at home, he left the wedding photo up, as decoration, a prop for his role. Sophie turned on the fireplace, sat on the warm hardwood floor, and opened the photo library from 5 years ago. In each image, Nate smiled like she was his universe. When she wore his oversized shirt, flipping her first pancake. When they sneakily took photos at JFK during a delayed Zurich trip. And now, he went to Zurich with Leah. The next morning, at Carlton Hotel, their once favorite romantic spot, Sophie waited for Naomi on the rooftop terrace, sunlight filtering through glass panes. Naomi arrived with a high bun, Chanel sunglasses, coffee in hand, and fury in her eyes. He really slept with that bitch? Naomi asked as she pulled out a chair. Sophie nodded. I have proof, photos, texts, and yes, the perfume. He's scum, but she's a monster in Louboutins. Sophie chuckled softly. And his mother? Naomi clenched her jaw. Eleanor is Medusa in Hermes. No heart, only ambition. They sat in silence for a moment. Naomi sipped her coffee. Sophie pulled out the USB. This has everything, including the prenup clause. Naomi read it, then looked up, eyes gleaming like a litigator winning $1 billion case. God. Sophie, if this goes public, Nate loses everything. Monroe Industries, his reputation, his seat on the board. Sophie gripped her cup. I don't want to ruin him. I just won't be buried alive in silence. Naomi took her hand. Then we don't stay silent. That evening, Sophie sat alone in her study, bathed in the warm glow of her desk lamp. She looked up at their framed marriage certificate and quietly took it down. Anything could be rewritten. In love. She opened her laptop and scrolled through the digital prenup copy to page 47, which contained a special clause. If the betrayed party possessed indisputable evidence during the marriage, all shared assets would be transferred entirely. No negotiation. She smiled, not out of bitterness, but like someone who had just retrieved a weapon long hidden. When Nate returned home just before midnight, he didn't come to the bedroom. The door remained ajar. Sophie stood in the dark, watching from the staircase above. The golden hallway light spilled onto the white steps. He went straight to the library, the same room Leah first entered for their private meeting. Sophie still remembered the security camera footage, Leah sitting in the black leather chair by the fireplace, sipping red wine from the crystal glasses Sophie had chosen for their wedding. It had all been a stage. And who was she? The lead actress? No. From now on, she was the director. Mornings at Newport Hills usually began with the chirping of finches and the scent of Guatemalan coffee from the automatic espresso machine. But today, the alarm didn't come from nature or caffeine. It came from Sophie Harper's phone, an alert from the mansion's security camera system. At 2:13 a.m., the library door had opened. Lights flicked on. A shadowy figure appeared in the grainy footage. Tall, slender, with long hair tied up. Leah Moretti, She had entered through the side door, a door that only two people had the access code to, Sophie Harper and Nathaniel Monroe. Sophie watched the footage 3 times. After the 4th, she didn't watch again. She saved it. She forwarded it to a private email address labeled Monroe Case, where she had backed up every evidence since day 1. No phone calls, no confrontation, no tears. She stood up, walked into her custom mahogany walk-in closet, and selected a dark charcoal knee-length dress, draping a sheer white blazer over her shoulders. The outfit of a woman about to meet her mother-in-law, prepared to face one of the most calculating minds in American finance. Eleanor Monroe resided in a penthouse at the Beverly Hills Plaza, 46th floor, ceilings lined with Italian marble, floor-to-ceiling windows facing the Santa Monica mountain range. But inside wasn't a place of family. It was a boardroom wrapped in cold light and the lingering scent of Clive Christian No. 1, the world's most expensive perfume, much like Eleanor herself, elegant, uncomfortable, and exorbitantly priced. Sophie didn't come empty-handed. She brought a copy of the prenuptial agreement and a financial statement tracing suspicious transactions between Monroe Industries and 2 Delaware shell companies connected to Leah Moretti, both incorporated within the last 6 months. Her mother-in-law stood waiting, a crystal baccarat glass of white wine in hand. Sophie. Eleanor nodded, her smile as warm as greeting an assistant, not a daughter-in-law. Quite the surprise. You taking initiative. I assume you already know, Sophie said, placing the documents on the marble coffee table. Eleanor didn't glance down. She sipped her wine. Know what? About Leah, about the fake mergers, about Nate being played. A dry smile curled on Eleanor's lips. If you think I don't know when my only son is fooling around with a stiletto-wearing distraction from Milan, you underestimate a 70-year-old woman. So you approve? I don't approve of anything, Eleanor replied, finally meeting Sophie's eyes. I control, as I always have. A chill ran down Sophie's spine. This woman didn't care who Nate loved, slept with, or broke, so long as Monroe Industries remained intact. And a child, Eleanor added, keeps it intact better than any contract. Sophie froze. You want me to have a baby? No. I want someone who can produce a legitimate heir, one with the Monroe name, Monroe blood, and no legal grounds to break from this empire. You're threatening me? I'm negotiating. Eleanor rose from her seat. Her posture was regal, and every step was quiet but commanding, as if the temperature had dropped around her. You're smart, Sophie. But don't ever believe you're the linchpin. I've incinerated women like you with a single look. Sophie stood calmly. Mother, she said evenly, the only scary thing about you is that you still think you control everything. And with that, she left the penthouse, trailing in her wake a storm of confrontation and the fire to rebuild everything without Eleanor Monroe's blessing. That afternoon, Sophie sat across from Naomi at a Japanese restaurant on Rodeo Drive. She actually said that about the baby? Naomi asked. Stunned, Sophie shrugged. My mother-in-law knows everything. Every transaction, every time I order vitamins, every OB/GYN appointment. I'd bet she has spies inside the clinic. Naomi exhaled. So what's next? Sophie pulled out her phone and showed Naomi a new text from an unknown number. We should meet. I know about Nate and Leah. I'm not who you think I am. D.C. Naomi's eyes widened. Who the hell is D.C.? David Chen. Used to act. Also, once I got paid to follow me. Oh my God. Is this a conspiracy or a Netflix original? Both, Sophie replied with a smirk. And I just booked a meeting with him. Naomi slammed her hand on the table. Girl, you're about to launch the first strike. I love it. By late afternoon, in a discreet cafe in downtown LA, Sophie met David Chen, a clean-cut man in a denim jacket and a low baseball cap. He slid a sealed brown envelope across the table. What's in there? Sophie asked. The entire contract they gave me to fabricate evidence of your affair, David said. Photos, videos, handwritten notes. All fake. Sophie opened it and began flipping through the contents. Photos of her and David at a gym, sitting close in a cafe. Even a shot of them kissing a moment she had no memory of. Photoshop? No. Deepfake, David replied. They stitched it together from thousands of tiny clips you uploaded online social media, blogs, live streams, conference talks. Sophie's hands trembled slightly, but her eyes stayed razor sharp. They really wanted to bury me. David looked down, ashamed. I used to be someone who needed the money. Now I can't look in the mirror. Sophie tucked the files into her bag, pulled a sleek card from her wallet, and handed it to him. Call Miranda Hill, former federal prosecutor, now my legal advisor. She'll help you if you do one last thing. David nodded solemnly. I owe you. What do you want me to do? Help me reconstruct the truth. Every piece, every email, every call, every attempt they made to destroy me. What are you planning? Sophie stood, sliding her coat over her shoulders, to lead them to the final game, where I place the king, and every one of them is just a pawn. Mornings in Newport Hills were no longer a privilege. They were a cruel reminder of a life once beautiful, of the mornings spent together over Guatemalan coffee, reading the Wall Street Journal, discussing investments, and dreaming of their first child. Now, the kitchen was as silent as a tomb. Sophie Harper sat alone on the granite countertop, phone on mute, eyes fixed on the screen with a list of missed calls. Nathaniel Monroe hadn't responded to a single message or call in 3 days. He hadn't come home, not a single word of explanation. But last night, Sophie received something else. A quiet fax slid out from the secure printer in her ground-floor office. No sender, just a single line. Check page 14, line 6, section G. She pulled out their old prenuptial agreement and turned to the line. In the event of infidelity substantiated by evidence, the betrayed party may invoke clause 6 grams, temporary control rights. It wasn't just about marital assets. It was about executive authority, temporary control over all financial systems, investment portfolios, and Monroe Industries voting shares under emergency protection to prevent damage from immoral actions affecting joint assets. It was a clause nearly no one had ever used. A clause Sophie Harper had once written herself. 3 years ago, Sophie had been a policy advisor specializing in contractual law at a top New York firm before becoming Nate's wife. They fell in love while working together at Morgan Stanley. She had drafted hundreds of prenuptial asset agreements. But with Nate, she wrote the contract of her life. Back then, it was an act of love. If I ever discover you've been unfaithful, I won't fight. I'll just ask that you let me walk away in peace. Nate had laughed. If that day comes, you can have everything. Sophie had taken him at his word. And now, that agreement was the only sword she still held in this battlefield of betrayal, power, and legacy. That afternoon, Sophie scheduled a meeting with Miranda Hill, a former federal prosecutor, now legal advisor in billion-dollar divorces. In her Century City office, Miranda wore a deep navy suit, thin-rimmed glasses, and spoke in a voice cool as steel. Activating clause 6 grams isn't like fighting for custody of a dog, Miranda said flatly. I have evidence, Sophie replied, sliding over a file of documents, photos, emails, and the mysterious fax. Emails from Nate to Leah, promising post-merger stock allocations. Miranda flipped through the file. So he used sex to accelerate a corporate merger, and my mother-in-law knew. Miranda arched an eyebrow. I've gone up against Eleanor Monroe in 3 court battles. No one wins, only survivors. Sophie smirked. Good, I'm not aiming to win. If needed, I aim to survive and take her whole empire down with me. Miranda nodded. Then I'll call Judge Williams, the only one with the guts to freeze Monroe Holdings on technical grounds. Sophie closed her eyes for 1 second. When she opened them, her gaze was sharp enough to cut crystal. Do it. Before Eleanor does it first. As rain rolled in that evening, Sophie received an express delivery envelope. No uniformed courier. No signature. Inside was an internal contract draft from Monroe Industries, a proposed merger with Ethereum Group in Chicago. Signed by Leah Moretti. Listed under personal asset transfer. 4.2 million Series B shares moved from Nathaniel Monroe's account to an anonymous recipient. Sophie sat frozen on the stone floor, her palms icy. She understood what was happening. Nate was stripping her of power, cleanly, strategically. And Leah the mistress wasn't just some affair. She was a move, a lever. A pawn in Nate and Eleanor's endgame to orchestrate the most significant restructuring in the firm's history, cut Sophie out, annul the marriage cleanly, and lose nothing. Unless Sophie struck first. The next day, Sophie didn't show up at Monroe headquarters. Instead, she appeared at the Los Angeles Superior Court, carrying a petition to invoke Clause 6 grams and an internal suit for emergency financial control. The court processed it, and at exactly 10:47 a.m., the ruling was faxed to Monroe Industries headquarters in Century City. Temporary financial oversight of Monroe Holdings is granted to Sophie Harper Monroe for 30 days, or until an official judgment is rendered. At that exact moment, Nathaniel Monroe was in a mid-boardroom meeting. His assistant burst in, face pale, handing him the fax. Nate read it. His expression turned from blank to livid. He gripped the paper, then dropped it as though it were on fire. She really did it, he muttered. She actually dared. Lawrence, the CFO, exhaled. Sophie is now interim CEO. We no longer have veto authority while the injunction stands. And just like that, within a single morning, the woman once dismissed as Monroe's arm candy flipped the board. That night, Sophie returned to Newport Hills. She didn't eat, didn't speak. She turned on the lights one by one in every room, like illuminating the hidden corners of a life too long in shadow. When she reached the library, the room where Nate and Leah had once met in secret, she stepped inside and locked the door behind her. For the first time in months, she opened the second drawer from the left, the one holding her private journals, dating back to her earliest days as a Monroe daughter-in-law. On the cover of the oldest journal, it read, "The day I gave up my old name, I thought I was reborn. Now I know. I had only just begun to live." Nights in Newport Hills had a kind of silence unlike anywhere else, not due to a lack of noise, but because every sound was muffled beneath layers of luxury and tension. Sophie Harper sat alone in the library, the desk lamp casting a dim golden glow across the oak floor. Spread before her were printed records of transactions from Nathaniel Monroe's personal account payments that had allowed Leah Moretti to amass enough shares to become a central player in the planned merger with Ethereum Group. She held Nate's Mont Blanc fountain pen, his 35th birthday gift, and underlined each number. Every line, every digit was a piece of evidence. There was no doubt anymore. This wasn't just infidelity. This was orchestrated betrayal, strategic, structured, and far more ruthless than anything Sophie had seen in high-stakes meetings at Morgan Stanley or the Harvard Law Review. This was a chess game, and Sophie was no longer sitting on the sidelines. She was at the center of the board seconds before the Queen would be sacrificed. The next morning, Sophie woke with a plan. She began by calling Miranda Hill, her legal advisor, and requested an emergency meeting with 3 independent board members of Monroe Industries. "We need to define executive roles formally during the interim," she said over Bluetooth while driving out of the estate. "I don't want Nate having any chance to rebuild shadow influence through Leah or hidden shareholders." There was a pause on Miranda's end. "Sophie, you should know Eleanor is in New York, and she's not staying quiet. I just received word that she's meeting with 3 major Wall Street investors. She might push for a board vote to reinstate Nate as CEO." Sophie gave a short laugh. "Good. She won't expect me to know how to play that game, too. What are you planning?" Sophie didn't answer. She gripped the wheel tighter. At Monroe Industries' glass tower, 52 stories tall in the heart of Century City, Sophie entered the boardroom with an expression like frost. Her dark hair fell softly around her shoulders, her cream-white suit hugged her frame precisely, and her eyes lined just enough to slice. 3 middle-aged men, the independent board members, stood as she entered. Their greetings were hesitant, but respectful. Once, they'd regarded her as the CEO's wife. Now, they stood before the legal interim CEO, and they knew she was sharper than her ex-husband ever was. Sophie opened the meeting with a single sentence. "We have 2 choices, restructure internally, or let the Wall Street Journal run a headline that reads, 'Monroe controlled by CEO's mistress while the board remained silent.'" "Silence," she continued. "I have the transaction records. I have copies of the concealed merger agreement. I have private messages between Nathaniel and Leah where he promises to share power once she gets pregnant. One board member, Mr. Dawson, cleared his throat nervously. They're planning a child. Sophie looked directly at him. If you were an investor, who would you rather see inherit Monroe? The child of the CEO's mistress, or the legitimate heir from a protective marriage? More silence. Finally, Mr. Weathers, the oldest member, spoke. What do you want, Mrs. Harper Monroe? Sophie lifted her chin. An emergency vote suspend Nathaniel Monroe from all financial, communications, and governance activity for 30 days. Simultaneously, appoint me interim CEO with full authority to restructure personnel and protect shareholder interests. What's your first move? Remove Lia Moretti. A long pause, then 3 nods, a consensus, and a beginning. Meanwhile, in New York, Eleanor Monroe sat stone-faced in the 67th floor boardroom of Blackwell Investment. On the table before her lay a draft counteroffensive that named a new CEO candidate, leveraging the preferred shareholder rights she had quietly accumulated over the years. Her strategy was straightforward. Oust Sophie via a no-confidence vote from major shareholders. Launch a PR smear campaign. Sue her for violating internal governance clauses. What Eleanor didn't anticipate was that Sophie had already moved first. Just as she concluded her presentation to the investor group, an assistant rushed in, handing her a phone. Breaking news. From LA. Eleanor pressed the phone to her ear. A lawyer's voice came through. Mrs. Monroe, Sophie's just been confirmed as interim CEO. The board voted 3 out of 3 in his favor. Monroe Industries is temporarily out of Nathaniel's hands. Eleanor tightened her grip on the wine glass. Her face remained composed, but her nails dug deep into her palm. Sophie had just shattered a 47-year precedent in the Monroe dynasty, and Eleanor knew this war wasn't about money anymore. It was about survival. That evening, back at Newport Hills, Sophie lit every lamp in the library. She spread out the restructuring plan on the long table and called Naomi. Naomi, now acting as Sophie's temporary spokesperson, arrived with a thick folder of press contacts, PR agencies, and a growing network of female investors ready to back the betrayed wife, fighting the Monroe patriarchy. You're becoming an icon, Naomi said. Not just for women going through divorce, for anyone ever buried by the so-called family legacy. Sophie didn't smile. She met Naomi's eyes and spoke slowly. I haven't won. I've only moved first. They will retaliate. And it will hurt. Naomi nodded. Then we'll hurt together. Upstairs, in the shadows, Nathaniel Monroe stood on the balcony, watching the light from the library spill across the lawn. He didn't enter. He didn't call. He didn't text. He realized for the first time in his life that he had been removed from the board, and the person who cost him everything. She was the same woman who had once trusted him so profoundly that she wrote a contract capable of destroying herself if only he betrayed her. He struck a match, burned a letter he had written, but never sent. The ashes floated slowly, much like his place in Sophie's life. Now nothing more than something the wind could carry away. Sophie Harper sat in the kitchen of the Newport Hills estate, across from Nathaniel Monroe, her legal husband, the betrayer now shielded by a designer suit and a chillingly restrained demeanor. They were seated at the same table for the first time in nearly a month. For the first time in hundreds of silent days, they were talking about the one thing he had long avoided. A child. Not out of love, but out of power. I want you to have a child, Nate said in a low, steady voice. Not for the merger, not for the shareholders, but because I want something real. Between us. Sophie didn't smile. She sat upright, setting her glass of orange juice onto a silk-lined coaster. You don't have the right to speak of real, she replied. Not after handing someone else my future and calling it yours. Nate said nothing. His eyes darkened, but this time, not from anger, from fear. Not fear of losing a wife, but fear of losing control. I know I messed up, he said slowly. I thought I had everything under control, but when I saw you standing before the board, taking Monroe back from me, I realized I lost the one thing I should have never underestimated. What's that? Sophie tilted her head. You. A silence fell between them. A bird tapped on the upstairs window. Sophie didn't flinch. Her gaze remained ice-cold. You have 3 options, she said. I'm listening. First, we attend marriage therapy. 3 sessions per week. 12 weeks. No interruptions. Nate nodded. Done. Second, I decide if, when, and how we have a child, including the right to use donor sperm if I choose to. Nate froze, but didn't object. Third, Sophie leaned back, her voice firmer than ever. If we have a child, they'll carry a hyphenated name. Monroe, Harper. I will not raise a child to be the replica of an empire that drained its mother. Nate met her eyes. Okay, Sophie nodded once. And finally, the non-negotiable condition. What is it? Lia Moretti disappears. No events, no meetings, not a single email. I won't compete with a cheap accessory. Nate closed his eyes, but Sophie didn't let him speak. If she shows up even once, I'll release the entire merger agreement you signed with Ethereum. Every share transfer, every clause about the child you planned as leverage. And this time, no one will save you. Nate nodded again. No arrogance in his expression, just the remains of a man who once thought himself invincible. Sophie stood. Breakfast was over. The war had only just begun. Later that day, Sophie arrived at a specialist fertility clinic in Beverly Hills, which she had visited shortly after their wedding. She sat in the waiting room, flipping through her old file. The last time she was here, the doctor had warned of early ovarian decline, and Nate had left halfway through the consultation because of a last-minute meeting. Today, Dr. Mitchell greeted her with a gentle but clear tone. You still have frozen eggs from 3 years ago, but with the current stress, I recommend IVF with donor sperm if you genuinely want to become a mother, not a wife. Sophie gave a soft smile. I'm here for myself, no one else. Then we'll begin with updated hormone panels, uterine scans, and an endometrial biopsy. After that, you need to decide on the donor. Already done, Sophie said, pulling a file from her bag and placing it on the desk. The cover read, Marcus J. Chen, molecular biologist, age 38, blood type O, no medical history, IQ 146. Dr. Mitchell skimmed the file and nodded. Excellent choice. He agreed to donate for personal reasons. Sophie looked out the window. I saved his brother from bankruptcy. This island. A gift returned. The doctor didn't press further. She stamped approved on the donor file. That afternoon, Sophie returned to Monroe Industries as interim CEO. She held an internal meeting and made her first executive decision: terminate Lia Moretti for conflict of interest. The dismissal letter was hand-delivered to the Four Seasons Beverly Hills, where Lia stayed. Lia called instantly. You think you can just do this? She screamed. I have photos, videos, everything about your husband. Sophie's tone didn't waver. And I have audio recordings of every undeclared stock transaction you made, including the ones you failed to disclose to the SEC. Would you prefer a prison sentence for insider trading? Silence. This is the last time your name passes through my mouth. Get out of this city, or I won't just burn your career, I'll erase your financial identity. The line went dead. The CEO's chair was still warm, but Sophie knew this heat came from pressure, not glory. That night, she stood alone in the nursery, the room they had decorated after their wedding. Walls painted pale blue, little white bear decals, still empty. She placed her hand on her abdomen, not for Nate, not for Eleanor, not for the dynasty, for herself, because she deserved a family, one not built on the bloodline of betrayal. When Nate returned home that night, Sophie was in the library, reading financial files. He stood at the door. Did you have a doctor's appointment? He asked, trying to keep his voice neutral. Yes. Do you want me to go with you next time? Sophie flipped the page, didn't look up. No, I know I messed up. Knowing is not enough, she replied. Fixing it is what matters. And you don't have time. She looked up, her first eye contact with him in weeks. You have one chance. Be a good father if I bring this child into the world. Beyond that, don't ask for anything else. Nate could only nod. Sophie turned back to her documents, because from now on, love wasn't a condition. It was a choice, and she had made hers. To love herself first. That day, the sky over Los Angeles bore no sun, only ash-gray clouds and a bone-dry wind. A bleak afternoon, but perfect for dark truths to come to light. Sophie Harper sat in her office on the 51st floor of Monroe Industries, facing someone she never expected to cross paths with a second time. Vivian Holloway, Nate's ex-wife. Vivian, short brown hair, crisp white shirt, black jeans, polished enough to walk onto a TED stage, looked directly at Sophie as if they hadn't once shared the same man. "You want to know the biggest secret of the Monroe dynasty?" Vivian began, skipping pleasantries. Sophie set her pen down and closed the file in front of her. "I've heard many secrets. Say what you came to say." Vivian placed a yellow envelope on the desk. "You think Leah Moretti is the daughter of a Milanese investor, right?" Sophie gave a mild nod. "Or a staged lover. Nate used to manipulate shareholders." Vivian smirked. "She's more than staged. She's an actress. Real name, Amelia Ray Montrose, born in Kansas. Attended a training program run by Persona, a marketing firm that builds fake identities for Black Ops Consulting. Sophie sat upright. "Proof?" Vivian opened the envelope, pulling out a birth certificate, behind-the-scenes stills from a commercial shoot, personal tax records, and most damning of all, a contract signed with Valence Group, a private intelligence firm, formerly contracted by Monroe Industries. "Eleanor hired her," Vivian said flatly, "to create a controlled threat. A lover for Nate, but also a pawn for Eleanor to push you into a position where bearing a child would be your only way to maintain control." Sophie leaned back, her head resting against the chair. The pieces clicked. Leah had never acted alone. She was a weapon shaped by someone more dangerous than Nate himself. His mother. Sophie left Monroe headquarters at 6:27 p.m. She didn't go home. Instead, she drove straight to the hotel where Amelia, formerly Leah, was staying. Fired, disgraced, no longer welcome at any corporate event tied to Monroe. A former staffer unlocked the penthouse on the 27th floor, Sophie's ex-assistant still loyal to her. Amelia sat by the minibar, hair down, makeup smeared by alcohol and exhaustion. "You come to kill me?" she asked, voice hoarse, eyes red. Sophie stood a meter away. She didn't sit. "No need. You've already destroyed yourself." Amelia gave a bitter laugh. "I was just hired help. Eleanor promised $1 million if the plan worked. And you thought that would make you a Monroe?" Amelia shrugged, but her eyes betrayed her somewhere between defiance and shame. "I just wanted, for once in my life, to choose, not wait to be chosen." Sophie froze. In that moment, she saw a diluted reflection of her younger self, back when she was a Harvard student, fighting for acknowledgement in rooms full of men with legacy last names. She didn't forgive, but she understood. "You'll leave LA tonight. I won't press charges if you vanish from my world. If not—" "I know," Amelia whispered. "I'll be erased." Sophie returned home just before 9 p.m. She turned on the library lights, her exhaustion not emotional but physical, like someone who had just fought through a political hurricane. On her desk was a pale blue folder courtesy of Miranda. Title: Generational Governance Pact. Eleanor Monroe. She opened it, read line by line, and then her heart skipped a beat. Eleanor had forced Vivian, Nate's ex-wife, to terminate a pregnancy in 2007. The evidence is a medical declaration Vivian had kept hidden for years, and an email from Eleanor to her private doctor requesting necessary procedures to protect family assets. Sophie gripped the armrest tightly. So she wasn't the first. Vivian hadn't left because of the distance. She'd been forced out before she could defend herself. Eleanor had erased a child because it didn't fit the plan. And now, she was attempting to manipulate the child Sophie hadn't even conceived yet. The following morning, Sophie summoned Miranda and Naomi to the estate. She laid all the evidence across the dining table: the truth about Amelia, the secret transactions, the 2007 abortion, and the fabricated employment contract from Persona. She pointed at the final folder. "I want to file a lawsuit against Eleanor Monroe for ethical violations and abuse of internal corporate authority." Miranda raised an eyebrow. "This will shake Wall Street to its knees." "Are you certain?" Sophie turned toward the window. The wind was rolling in from the San Rafael Hills. The clouds thickened, but within her, clarity roared. "Someone has to dare. And this time, that someone is me." Naomi placed a hand gently on her shoulder. "And if she hits back?" Sophie turned, eyes steely. "Then I'll show her this is no longer a world where women must bear children to earn a seat at the table." Nearly a week after Sophie Harper filed her lawsuit against Eleanor Monroe, the U.S. financial world trembled. Headlines flooded the media. Daughter-in-law sues mother-in-law. Monroe Industries faces generational reckoning. Sophie Harper accuses Eleanor Monroe of forced abortion, executive manipulation, and ethical misconduct. Billion-dollar dynasty torn apart by the woman once called a decorative piece. Within 48 hours, Monroe Industries stock dropped by 7%. Investors demanded an extraordinary shareholders' meeting. Eleanor's lawyers retaliated, immediately filing a counterclaim against Sophie for malicious defamation designed to damage both personal and corporate reputations irreparably. But Sophie was ready. She wasn't fighting for herself, not just for Vivian. She was fighting for the child she hadn't yet birthed, so that it could be born into a world where women didn't have to kneel for acceptance. That afternoon, Sophie left the offices of Hill and Associates, having just completed the first closed-door hearing. As she descended into the parking garage, her phone buzzed. A message from Liam Monroe, Nate's younger brother, the only Monroe who had ever quietly stood by her. Sophie, Nate just had a heart emergency. He's at UCLA Medical. You're the only one they'll allow in. Her chest tightened. She had prepared for every battle, legal, emotional, strategic. But not this. Not facing the man who once meant everything, now suspended between life and death. UCLA Medical Center, ICU. Nate Monroe lay motionless. His face was pale. IV lines crisscrossed his arms. The monitor beeped steadily, a cold countdown in digital tones. Sophie stepped into the room. Her shoulders were square, her eyes dry, but her feet felt like stone. She sat beside him, staring at the man who had once believed himself invincible, now resembling a child stripped of all armor. "Nate," she said, voice low and rough, "can you hear me?" No reply. "You know, I never imagined I'd be the last one sitting here. After everything," the machine kept ticking, "I was going to leave. With the baby. Without telling you." A subtle twitch in his finger, barely perceptible, but then I realized, "You're still part of this child. As much as I hate you, as much as I ache and rage, it still deserves to know who you were." Nate slowly opened his eyes. Sophie froze. "It's me," she whispered. "Sophie," he blinked. Once, then rasped, "I'm sorry." Sophie held her breath. It meant nothing legally, but emotionally, it weighed more than any clause ever could. "I was afraid of losing everything," he said, each word a struggle. "Didn't know I'd already lost you, long before I noticed." "You still have time," she replied, but didn't take his hand. "The baby. Is it still real?" "It's happening," she said. "But not the way you wanted." He closed his eyes. A single tear slipped down. Over the next 3 days, Sophie returned to the hospital daily. Not for Nate, but for the child, who deserved to know that his father, at least once, tried. One morning, she saw Eleanor Monroe standing outside the ICU. She hadn't entered the room. Dressed in a grey coat, her face bare of makeup, Eleanor looked stripped of power for the first time. "You're not going in?" Sophie asked, calm. Eleanor turned, her eyes no longer arrogant, just exhausted. "I don't know what I am to him anymore." "You're the mother who taught him that winning matters more than anything." Eleanor nodded. "And you're the one who showed him what that costs." A pause. Sophie didn't tell her to apologize. She knew Eleanor wouldn't. But as the older woman entered Nate's room, Sophie turned away. It was time to close the old chapter and prepare for a true beginning. That evening, Sophie gathered every file, medical records, HR documents, lawsuit evidence, and a strategic plan, and drove to Valence Group HQ. This company had created the fake identity of Leah Moretti. She placed the folder on the desk of Douglas Finn, the CEO. "I don't want to sue you," she said, her tone calm, "but if you don't help me, I'll have the FBI investigate the entire persona system you're illegally operating." Douglas Palid, "What do you want?" Sophie smiled faintly. "I want the complete client list, every high-level executive hired by Persona in the past 5 years. And I want your testimony before the Monroe board, confirming that Eleanor Monroe was behind the personnel fabrication." Douglas swallowed hard. "If I do that, I lose the company." Sophie stood. "If you don't, I'll make sure you lose your freedom." 3 days later, Douglas testified before the Monroe Board of Directors. Under oath, he confirmed, Eleanor Monroe hired Persona to construct a false identity for a fabricated executive, Leah Moretti, to manipulate internal operations and pressure Sophie Harper into having a child, thus preserving Monroe's dynastic control. The board was stunned. Shareholders panicked. By midnight, Eleanor Monroe announced her resignation. A dynasty fell, not by force, but by a woman who refused to be governed by her womb. The next morning, Sophie stood before the mirror in her bedroom. She was 6 weeks pregnant. The child didn't carry Nate's genes, but it would carry her strength, her integrity, her truth. She placed a hand over her stomach. If you're a daughter, I'll teach you to choose your voice. If you're a son, I'll teach you to listen. The wind stirred through the open balcony doors. Newport Hills no longer felt cold. It felt like a beginning. Summer in Newport Hills usually began with winds from the Pacific brushing up along the hills, dancing through the massive glass windows, making the velvet curtains sway like silk in water. But today, there was no wind. Only a tense stillness, like the air was holding its breath, waiting for something inevitable to happen. Sophie Harper stood on the third-floor balcony of her estate, the exact spot where she had watched countless sunrises over the ocean. But not today. Today, she wasn't watching the horizon. She was waiting for someone. The man standing below, by the black iron gates of the estate, was not her husband, not a lawyer, not a board member. It was Marcus J. Chen, the man who had agreed to be the biological donor for Sophie's child. She had never met him in person, not once, since the day the contract was signed. Everything had been handled through lawyers, hospitals, strict procedures, signatures, and seals. But now, Marcus had asked for one final conversation to make sure the child wouldn't be born as a transaction, but as something meaningful. Sophie welcomed him into the ground-floor living room, not grand, but warm, with soft amber lighting and the subtle scent of lavender from an oil diffuser placed on the bookshelf. Marcus, tall, lean, dressed, his voice low and kind, entered with quiet reservation. No theatrics, no expectations. "Thank you for letting me come," he said. "I know this isn't a usual request." Sophie nodded. "I don't usually receive guests who are the biological father of my child, either." They both laughed, but it was the kind of laughter shared only by people who had already lost too much, brushed against the limits of personal freedom, and still chose to keep walking without a map. "What I wanted to say," Marcus paused, "it's about my brother, the one you helped restructure his company when it was on the brink of collapse." Sophie froze, mid-breath. "He never told us who helped," Marcus continued. "Only said it was a woman with logic as cold as steel and a heart as warm as sunlight. I'm guessing that was you." Sophie turned slightly, smiling faintly. "Cold logic, yes. Warm heart? Depends on the day." A calm silence settled between them. "Do you want me to keep my distance?" Marcus asked directly. "I can disappear completely, or be somewhere on the edge available for any genetic, medical, or personality questions, but not a father." Sophie thought for a long moment, then replied, "I want my child to know who helped bring them into this world, but not as an obligation, as a choice." Marcus nodded. "I respect that." She stood and extended her hand. "Thank you, Marcus, for not treating this as a transaction, but as a human act." They shook hands, just an ordinary handshake. But for Sophie, it marked the necessary end, the moment she stepped fully into a chapter where no man carried with him power or betrayal. That night, Sophie climbed the stairs to her study and opened the ebony drawer once home to USBs, legal documents, and case files. But not tonight. Tonight, she opened a different box, an old one, faded oak, rusted brass lock, the box where she had kept things no one ever saw. A letter Nate once wrote to her during their honeymoon. The first ultrasound image from a pregnancy 3 years ago, a molar pregnancy lost in silence. A greeting card from Vivian, when she learned Sophie had married the man who once broke me. She didn't read. She just looked. Her eyes filled, but she did not cry. She closed the box, this time for good. The next morning, Sophie stood on stage at a Women Lead Finance event, invited to speak after her lawsuit against Eleanor Monroe shook the foundations of corporate America. She stepped up to the podium, her black hair cascading down, wearing a simple, elegant white dress. No heavy makeup, but her eyes still the same, deep, steady, unwavering. "We live in a world," she began, "where women are expected to be strong enough to survive a room full of men, then soft enough not to be considered a threat once they do." The room was utterly silent. "I'm not here as a victim. I'm not here to recount betrayal, manipulation, or sabotage. I'm here as someone who dared to say no, and lived to tell the story." Applause followed, not thunderous, but resonant, the kind that lingered. "My child will grow up never needing to know who their father was on paper, but they will know precisely who their mother was, someone who didn't stay silent when it mattered most." Back at Newport Hills, Sophie sat alone in her bedroom that evening. She wrote a letter not to be sent, not even signed, just written for the future. "My dearest child, if you're reading this someday, I want you to know you were not created out of love, but you were born from courage, and that is no less sacred. I gave up many things to have you, but I have never, not once, regretted it. And if one day you face a choice that might turn the world against you, I hope you're brave enough to say, 'My mother did it once, and I will too.'" She folded the letter and placed it inside the oak box next to all the others. For the first time, her past and future shared the same space. And that night, Sophie Harper slept peacefully, not because everything was okay, but because she was okay. 2 months after Eleanor Monroe's resignation, Sophie Harper walked into the Los Angeles Superior Court wearing a fitted black suit, her hair neatly tied back, and not a single piece of jewelry except for a Cartier watch she had bought for herself the day Monroe Industries formally named her permanent CEO. She didn't walk in alone. By her side were Naomi, the only friend who had never wavered in loyalty, and Miranda Hill, the only female attorney in finance who had ever forced 2 male CEOs to bow and sign over executive control in the same room. Ahead of them was the final hearing set to determine whether Eleanor Monroe would be criminally charged for coercive abortion and internal corporate abuse of power. But that wasn't the only reason Sophie was there. Today, she would declare to the public the child she carried did not belong to the Monroe bloodline. The courtroom was packed. Reporters swarmed the building like paparazzi awaiting a political downfall. News sites updated by the hour. Sophie Harper will present the final evidence. Eleanor Monroe's legacy is on the line. For the first time in Monroe Industries history, current CEO and former matriarch face off in open court. Presiding was Judge Ava Ross, a woman renowned for never bowing to power. In a previous case, she had stripped a billionaire heir of his inheritance due to ethical violations in executive conduct. She looked first at Sophie, then at Eleanor, her hair now streaked with grey, her eyes still holding embers of defiance. "We will begin with the plaintiff's opening statement," the judge said. Sophie stepped to the podium. Her eyes did not flicker. "I'm not here to destroy anyone," she began. "I'm here to end a chain of behaviors passed down through 3 generations of women. Women taught that to survive, they must sacrifice themselves." Silence enveloped the room. "I was once seen as decoration, then as the wife who couldn't bear children, then as a threat to the estate, but no one saw me as a capable executive until I claimed the seat and refused to stay silent." She turned her gaze toward Eleanor. "And you, the one who told me you must bear a child to keep your place. You committed the worst act of all. You tore the right to choose out of another woman's hands." Sophie opened the folder, raising 2 documents high. The medical report is from Vivian, Nate's ex-wife. An audio transcript of Eleanor instructing her private doctor to terminate the pregnancy without leaving a trace. Gasps rippled across the room. "Today," Sophie said, her voice clear, "I'm not asking for prison. I'm asking for a permanent ban on Eleanor Monroe's access to any board, position, or enterprise with influence over women's lives." Judge Ross nodded and turned to the defense. Eleanor stood slowly, but not shakily. "I come from a different generation," she began, "where survival didn't come from love or compassion, but from knowing when to stay silent. I was wrong to believe the old ways could control the new world." She looked directly at Sophie, her eyes soft for the first time. "But if there's one thing I wasn't wrong about, it was my judgment of you." The courtroom held its breath. "You are strong. You are sharp. You are terrifying in precisely the way women should be terrifying today. And for that, I don't ask for mercy. I only say, you've won." Then Eleanor stepped down. for the first time in her life without being told what to do. After the hearing, with reporters surrounding her like a tide, Sophie gave only one statement. When women take their seat at the table of power, they should not have to sacrifice their womb, their love, or themselves to be heard. Then she walked away. No more words, no tears, no glorious celebration, just a proper ending, and the beginning of something larger. Sophie held a private press conference at Monroe Industries headquarters 3 days later. She sat against a plain white backdrop, a discreet microphone clipped to her dress, one hand gently resting on her now visible 3-month baby bump. Her voice was soft as a breeze, but sharp as iron. I know many of you have wondered whose child this island. Let me be clear, this child does not bear the Monroe name. It wasn't conceived out of a relationship, but out of a promise that no one else gets to decide the future of my body or my life, except me. A reporter asked, "Aren't you afraid your child will grow up being asked about its father?" Sophie smiled, fingers brushing her belly. "My child won't be asked. It will be taught to ask back. Why do you think only a father defines who I am?" Silence, and then applause. Not thunderous, but steady. Applause from the women who had long carried the silent weight of questions like, "When will you have children?" As if biology were a social contract. That evening, Sophie stood once again on her balcony at Newport Hills. The wind had returned. She received a message from Nate. "You won. I have nothing left to say, only hope that one day your child won't hate me for who I failed to be." She didn't respond. She placed a hand over her belly. "My love, they'll ask you many things, but only one truth matters. I didn't bring you into this world for revenge. I brought you here because I chose to, and no one will ever take that right from me." She stepped back inside, closed the door, and for the first time in months, the night in Newport Hills was truly at peace. 6 months after the historic court case, everything had changed at Monroe Industries, not because of a sweeping restructuring or billion-dollar merger, but because something far simpler had finally happened. The culture of silence had been broken. Sophie Harper, now official CEO, expectant mother, and symbol of a new generation of leadership, had not only transformed how the company operated, she had redefined how women were allowed to exist in power. Gone were the pencil skirts and business feminine heels. Women walked into boardrooms wearing sneakers, laptops slung over their shoulders, and babies in their bellies no longer forced to hide their pregnancies like some aesthetic inconvenience. At the annual shareholders' meeting, Sophie stood on stage, her hand resting gently on her 8-month belly. "This," she said, voice clear and proud, "is not inconvenient. This is life. And if you think it makes me weaker, I'm sorry to disappoint you. I've just closed 3 deals worth over $400 million in the last 3 weeks. Laughter filled the room, but beneath the humor was something greater, an acknowledgement that power no longer had to imitate men to be respected. Outside the office, Sophie spent her time preparing the nursery, but not in the traditional way. There was no pink or blue, no gender-coded labels. She chose soft creams, natural wood, and wall art of quotes by Maya Angelou, Audre Lorde, and Ruth Bader Ginsburg. On the closet door hung a small handwritten sign. "This space belongs to a person, not a role." One afternoon, Naomi dropped by with 2 gift boxes, one filled with sustainable newborn clothes, the other, a toy microphone labeled CEO in training. Sophie laughed. "What if she doesn't want to be a CEO?" Naomi shrugged. "Then she'll tear up your office and go write poetry." They both laughed together, freely. When Sophie became too far along to travel, she ran Monroe from home, attending investor meetings via Zoom. During one session with an international group, a German male investor half-joked, "I've never seen a CEO negotiate an M&A deal while experiencing false labor contractions mid-call." Sophie responded without hesitation, "Just because you've never seen a woman do it doesn't mean she hasn't done it. You just never gave her the seat." Silence followed, but this time, it wasn't shocking. It was self-reflection. On a breezy night in early June, the ocean winds crept through the balcony doors of Newport Hills. Sophie sat in the reading room, rubbing her belly, rereading the letters she had written for her child. One letter she had never reopened, the first one written on the day she found out she was pregnant, after choosing not to use Nate's sperm. My love, today, I don't know what to call you. No image, no ultrasound, no heartbeat yet, but I know you exist. I chose you, not because of who you are, but because of who I am with you. And that, it is reason enough to bring a human into this world. She folded it gently and placed it in the old oak box, now the official memory chest for her child. On June 19, the same day the court officially dismissed Eleanor Monroe's final countersuit, Sophie Harper entered labor. She declined an ambulance. She drove herself to UCLA Medical Center, accompanied by Miranda and Naomi. Nate, upon being notified, asked to be in the delivery room. Sophie said yes, not because she forgave him, but her child deserved to know where it came from, whether he would stay. The labor lasted over 12 hours. It was intense, exhausting, but when Sophie placed the baby against her chest, everything dissolved. A daughter, 3,1 kilograms, rosy skin, thick black hair, eyes tightly shut, but her tiny hand clung fiercely to her mother's finger. Sophie named her Sophie Harper. No Monroe after it. Not out of hate, but out of freedom. Rowan, a name rooted in Norse mythology. The rowan tree symbolizes protection, independence, and new beginnings. When Naomi carried baby Rowan to the nursery, Nate stood on the balcony, holding a folded letter. Sophie stepped out, her hand resting lightly on the doorway. I wrote something for her, he said, his voice hollow. Okay, she replied, but don't give it to her. Please give it to me. I'll keep it. He turned to her. The venom in his gaze was gone. Only emptiness remained. Thank you for not erasing me. No one gets to erase anyone, she said gently, but I chose to close the door. Don't lock it. Don't open it. He nodded, then walked away quietly. Sophie returned to the nursery, where Rowan slept soundly. She opened the baby journal and wrote the first entry. On the day you were born, your mother had no husband beside her, no family crowding the room, no celebration, only a choice. And sometimes, that's enough to create something great. 1 year later, at the TED Women Conference in San Francisco, Sophie Harper took the stage baby Rowan, now walking beside her, curly hair bouncing, eyes bright and mischievous. Her talk was titled, Permission to Be as a Mother, a Leader, and a Disruptor. I didn't have a child to complete myself, she said. I had a child because I was already complete, and knew I could do it without losing who I am. She paused, looking down at Rowan, now fiddling with the microphone. My daughter will not grow up to be someone's hope. She will grow up to be herself, and that's what I've chosen for her. From the very first day, the audience rose to their feet, not because Sophie was a CEO, not because she had won a court case, but because she was a woman who had refused to stay silent, even when the world begged her to. Later that evening, as the sun set over San Francisco Bay, Sophie and Rowan sat together on the hotel steps, eating ice cream. No one stared at them as an incomplete family. No one asked, "Where's the father?" Because now, no one cared where Rowan came from. They only saw where she was. And that was everything Sophie Harper had ever wanted.